Okay, I think we should just go ahead and get started, and if people hop on, they can hop on and join us. And welcome. This is our first attempt at doing this. We had hoped to have something in person, but I think this will be just fine. And we have Tammy Krausman, who's the REAP coordinator for IDNR. And Tammy, I'm going to just let you take it away. You've got your PowerPoint ready to go. And, you know, I guess we could go through quick and say, oh my God, we're doing a cleanup here at ECIA, and I hear Carl outside my window singing. But anyway, I know that, Dave, does Makokata or anybody have an actual project plan for this application cycle? And Stephanie?
I am not aware of it at this point.
Okay. And Jennifer, what about you?
Sorry, I had myself muted. No, I just want to kind of get an idea of what the process is like. I know that I wanted to kind of try to do a grant for something with Hometown at one point, and I was afraid to do it. So I just need some more education on it so I can be of service.
Okay. All right. Well, that kind of gives you the background of where we're at, Tammy, kind of all over the place. So I'll let you take it from here.
Well, thank you. And hopefully by the end, you'll feel confident and at least wanting to attempt at a REAP grant. Some good news to share. The legislature, when they adjourned on Sunday, actually did a 2-year extension for REAP. So REAP was due to sunset in 2021. But they actually did a 2-year extension on that. So that's up to 2023 now. So that's great news. They also, with the status quo, kind of the continuing resolution that they passed, would put REAP in at $12 million again for the program. So again, great news. You know, Iowa's, I think, in better shape than some of the other states we're hearing about. So we were really excited to hear all of that. So that was good news. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the program and the grant programs that are in REAP. So that way you can think about what projects you may have with your cities or counties. And then I'll also kind of talk about some just application tips and kind of the nitty gritty. And then I'm happy to talk about your projects or your thoughts and your ideas and brainstorm what might make better applications or which may work for a different funding source. So I'll kind of do my little bit here, and then I'm happy to hear from you guys. So I'm going to try to do the technology here if I can. Oh, yay. This is also my first time doing this. So REAP was signed into law 31 years ago by Governor Branstad in 1989. And really what it is about, so it's resource enhancement and protection. So it's about those things that are open spaces, water quality projects. You know, I mean, as it's evolved, it's turned into things, you know, like right now, issue du jour are pollinator plots and trails and connecting our places together. But it also does a lot of other things. It provides for lots of different funding sources all over to different programs. So how the funding works, just real quick, is it comes in through the Environment First Fund, which is gaming revenues. So it's not a general funded program, it's through gaming revenues. And it's supposed to be in code at $20 million, but there's always other state priorities, as we all know. So it gets something less than that. And the last few years, it's gotten around 12 million. If you look at the overall 31-year history, it's averaging right about $11 million over the 31 years is how much it's received. So there's this, you know, I pretend it's famous, but it's called the REAP funding formula, or we always have it in a pie chart, so you hear a lot. It's called the REAP pie. And this is actually how it was put into law 31 years ago, when all these different groups who said, you know, we need funding for lots of our different community projects. We need funding for agricultural, for soil and water enhancement. The Department of Natural Resources needs funds, you know, roadside vegetation. So there's lots of different groups that got together and said, this is how, we can split up this fund. And really all these groups have then just worked together to keep this fund going. And so you have something that's largely been unchanged for 31 years in state government. And that's pretty rare. Think about some of the other state funded programs you look at, and there's some pretty fundamental changes over time, but this one's really just kind of kept working. So how it works is the money comes in. The first $350,000 off the top is for conservation education, and I'll talk about that. That's a grant program. 1% for administration, so that's for people like me, and then also most of these dollars are pass-through dollars, so they go out to those folks. And then additional to the $12 million appropriation are the license plate dollars, which, like every other license plate fund, are hemorrhaging right now because of the blackout plates, and those are like crazy off the charts popular. So it's always my one sales plug is to, if you can, I know the dropout or the blackout plates look amazing, but like there's also the natural resources plates out there. And that money goes into both the REAP program and the wildlife diversity program, which is for threatened and endangered species, eagles, things like that. So I'm just going to kind of pop around here to some of the grant programs that are out there as so you guys can think about your projects. So the first one is conservation education, which gets $350,000. It's a grant program that happens twice a year. So there's a deadline coming. I think it was June 1. So I think that one would be missed. But now that we know there's funding for next year, then it was June 15th. I'm sorry, June 15th, and then November 1st. So so those are there. And so this is for really about conservation education programs. So there's a lot of things the county conservation boards work on, teacher curriculum, in getting students outside. I'm sure there's probably going to be an onslaught of online education opportunities coming through with this next grant cycle as we all try to figure out what to do and what type of self-learning is going to be happening. The Iowa Outdoors program that you see on public television, some funding. There's been externs with the STEM program that have gotten funding. So just really a grab bag of conservation education that you're doing. They're in a little bit of a transition period where they used to be very just about programs. But I think that the board is kind of thinking of that it can be some more of those tangible things. So outdoor signs and kiosks and different things like that, if you're wanting to put some kind of natural resources interpretation out there, that those are starting to be more eligible as well. So if you're doing any of that, just reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with those folks and have a little bit of a dialogue on how to be more successful there.
Hey, Tammy, before you move on,
Yeah.
I do have a question about that particular program.
Mhm.
So a couple of our local counties have been working in partnership with the University of Iowa on a program called School of the Wild. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
Okay, so is that that type of program something that would be eligible for this type of funding?
Yeah, and I was thinking that they had gotten funding in the past. So, but
The
so
university has?
yeah, the university has, University of Iowa, because that's the
Okay.
University of Iowa, right?
Correct.
So I believe that they got funding 3-4 years ago, maybe. And one of the things with that is, so so there's only 350 in there. So they will sometimes fund, 1, 2, 3 years of a program, but it won't be like a in perpetuity funding source. So a lot of times, that year 2 or like that year 3, they'll want to see sustainability for that program. So what other sources is, sometimes this was seen almost as an innovation fund. So like, here's what we do, to get new ideas out there and to fund those and to see if they work. And then once they work, hopefully they're proven and there's some other funding sources out there. But otherwise this funding would just fund the same 3 programs every year. So yeah, but look into that. And if they're doing some type of evolution with that, then there's an idea to come back with as well.
Well, I think, in the past, a lot of their focus has been in Johnson County, where the university is at, with the Iowa City school districts. And now they're looking at trying to use a similar type of program, but in rural parts of the state, at which they hadn't done previously. And so that would be the twist here. And I know Jones and Jackson counties are working with the University of Iowa. Dubuque County, which is part of our Parks People region, heard about it and listened to the presentations, but then have decided kind of to do their own thing with county conservation, but without the University of Iowa, because they wanted to do something instead of taking like just the 5th graders out for a week. They wanted something that could be done a little bit every year, starting at kindergarten up through, I think, 6th grade they were looking at. So they were looking at developing their own curriculum before COVID hit, and I don't know that anything's happened since then. So theirs is a somewhat different approach from.
Yeah, that would be, I mean, and that would be newly eligible as well. So, you know, for those folks, or if they're going to look at developing any type of online curriculum, you know, if there's going to be like School of the Wild, you know, at home edition or on your own edition or whatever, you know, I mean, I'm really curious to see what type of applications people have thought up, and how to deliver some of those services that we used to just do, you know, in mass, you know, that we might be doing a little bit differently now. Good questions, Dave.
Thanks.
Yeah. So the next one is Historic Resources Grant. They get 5% of the REAP allocation. This is administered through the Department of Cultural Affairs. So Kristen Vandermol, and if some of you guys know her from the other programs, they administer this. And so really there's kind of categories between historic preservation, libraries and archives, museums, one-room schoolhouses. They also have an emergency fund that you can use. So if you have a historic place that maybe, you know, the roof is going to cave in, or all of a sudden you find out there's a structural problem, or, you know, different things like that, they do set aside funds for emergencies. And then those are kind of on a first come, first serve basis. So, and if they aren't used, then they roll those into the grant program. So that's just it's a good reminder for people, as, you know, those structures often are kind of complicated, that there's some funding out there for those. There is, you know, I mean, there's lots of different projects in there, but I really just defer to Kristen on all of that. But just know that that's a great resource for lots of different entities. They've done a lot of digitizing of local newspapers or historic records. So if you have any of those in your areas, you know, I think they see 3 or 4 of those almost every single year. As well as, you know, just your buildings and your other types of archives. Since that's not my program, I'm not going to go too far into that, so I don't give you bad information. So the Roadside Vegetation program gets 3%, and that's administered through the Department of Transportation. They I think they're getting a little farther away from having their grants that they have, and now a lot of times it's just out to your county roadside managers, where there's a lot of equipment available. So they've really been moving to just making sure that counties have roadside managers or engineers have what they need in order to keep those maintained and up, you know, in good conditions. They also can do storage buildings if it's for some roadside management stuff, vegetation management, seeds, so lots of different things. So that's one where you can work with those other county entities on getting funding from there. So that's kind of how that's worked. It used to be more of kind of a city program where it was a little more beautification, and now I think it's just getting a little bit more into what I would almost say like the public works field, and integrating integrated vegetation with the roadsides. So again, there's Troy's number. He's great, so you can reach out to him if you have any questions.
Tammy, do you know if that is a program where there's like an annual application, or is this just an ongoing process?
They've changed it like almost every year, the last 3 years. And so I'm sorry, Dave, I don't actually know what it is. And I can ask Troy that question and find out.
Yeah, we can do that too. I was just curious. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't actually know. They've the program has been in a little bit of an evolution here. So getting into a little bit more of my responsibility is the county conservation grants. So county conservation gets 20% of the entire REAP allocation. And how it works is there's like so much math with REAP, but 30% is allocated equally to all 99 counties. So they just get that. And then the next 30% of the 20% is allocated based on populations. If they meet the county millage, which is 22 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. And so most counties, I think everyone in your region meets that. So so then they get that next 30%. And if they meet that, then they also qualify for grants. So so 40% is eligible. So the next 40% goes to those competitive grants. I promise you, probably all of your county conservation board directors know about this and have thoughts about it and are trying to figure out, you've had some big successes up there. These grants are very highly competitive. There is no match required. They could be for 100% if they need. Sometimes they score better if they are not, if they have some local match in there. These grants tend to skew because they are so competitive, they tend to just really go for rare and unique areas. So land acquisition of just, remnant prairies, fens. If there's an area in counties that don't have any parks or anything available, but maybe you have a pond and they're going to decide to do something around, those have fared well as well. Just recently, kind of out of the blue, museum exhibits got funded last year in Madison County. So they did a really great job of putting their application together for museum exhibits, or not museum, I'm sorry, interpretive center exhibits. And I know that a lot of counties are, that's where we do a lot of our interpretation for conservation is it at the county level. And so, having some availability there is huge. So this is where, just work with those counties on if they want to apply, if they have those areas, there's just, it's a great program for them. It's pretty speedy to get it all done with not a lot of paperwork. So, so that's the county conservation. Again, trails have been funded out of there. So those do qualify, but I'll talk about trails more in the city parks about how to kind of navigate that a little bit. Move to the next one, which is kind of the meat of the program here, which is the city parks and open space grants. So this is a competitive grant program, and like counties, it's quite competitive. The one thing that it's a little bit old school is grants are 100%, matching funds are not required. Again, depending on the scope of your project, having some private dollars or some local dollars in there can serve you well. So how the grant program works is there's 3 categories. So there's a small, the small, which you can see is under 2,000, and medium 2,000 to 25, and large is greater than 25. So that way you don't have Dubuque competing against, LeClaire or whatever. You have each individual size kind of competes against themselves, and there's an allocation set aside for each of those categories. So they get it based on population in actually I think it was 1990 when they kind of reapportioned that. Just for your guys' sakes, now that we know that REAP is going to be around for a little bit longer, we're going to look at the census data coming out of 2020. And we may look at doing a bit of a rule rewrite. So I'll be looking for information from cities to talk about, are these still the right splits? Are the apportionment that we put into each of these categories, are those right? And it's a very difficult conversation because, there's still a finite amount of dollars. And so you give to one, you take away from another. And I'll be looking for just some expertise of those agencies and people who are kind of in the COG world to help figure out what you're seeing out there. There is a maximum amount available each year. So, so based on your population, that's how much you can request each year. And so that's that chart below. And so right now we're asking you to use 2010 census data. So that's how you base your population. If you have a new number, if you've had, you know, a special census or anything like that, you can use that number, just include that letter or documentation in with your grant application. So some especially some of the larger suburb communities that are really moving, that have done that, can do that. The grant timeline is, you know, we try to run as slick as a operation as possible. Grants are due on August 15th. The application is available on the website. It's online. You just simply save it as a PDF and email me that PDF. There's no kind of portal or whatever. We looked at doing a portal, and a whole bunch of folks said, no, don't make me spend all my time just trying to figure out the character limits and how to upload a map or whatever. So we just let you kind of design the application and put it out there. So what we do then is there's a review committee. It's with those officials, so county folks review those, a selection committee, and then a selection committee of city folks review the city grants. We do that in mid-September, and then they make their determination. I usually let people know the preliminary results as soon as I can after that meeting in mid-September, and then you go to the Natural Resources Commission for approval in mid-October. We write grant agreements in November, December, and you can get as soon as that's signed, you can get your 90% available upfront if you need. So some communities need that for cash flow, so they can get that 90% upfront. And then you have, when you get it all done and all the paperwork turned in, you can get your final understanding bid processes and construction and allowing for weather. It takes sometimes 2 years to do projects.
Hey, Tammy.
Yeah.
Not that I would wait till the last minute to submit a grant, but is it due at 4:30 on the 15th?
It is. I can't, it's either 4:30 or 5. I'll have to just double check what I put on the website. Yeah, I have to set up a time, but no, it's so funny because, you know, I mean, we all do this, right? I mean, I do this too when I submit grants for like the feds, is, you know, whatever that time is, that hour before, oh, I'll get like 50 grants. So I love it. I love everybody who's like, one more proofread, one more write, they're doing it. So no judgment at all. So let's talk about the types of grants, the types of projects that work well. And so one of the things is I always want to show anybody who's going to write the grant the scoring criteria, right? Because that's how you write to the test. It's how you try to get funded. So REAP city grants is really types of, think of about what the program actually does. It's not playgrounds and ballparks and soccer fields. It's much more about open spaces, inviting nature in and getting people out engaged in nature, whether it's pavilions and shelters are fine, trails, because we're Iowa and we love trails, and everybody's trying to figure out how to fund their trail because it's expensive to get people outside. But also we have a lot of water quality needs in this state too, so how can we involve all of those things? The more multi-benefit your project is, or the more that you can figure out multiple benefits, the better. So so when you look at the scoring criteria, the first is the relationship to state and local and regional plans. Some people do a great job in this, and some people are just like, meh, I don't know. Some people wanted this project, and so we did it, and I don't know, it probably ties into stuff, but it's fine. And so you're just going to lose a lot of points on that. So try to draw some connection back to that. This is, kind of in these different strategic plans that we have, in the state and different things. There's the state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. There's the wildlife action plan. There's this forward stewardship plan. So those are all on the state level. You guys, I'm sure, do lots of regional planning, as well as if there's any type of local visioning that's happened, take credit for all of that, please. We want to see kind of that connection there. I mean, even if it's just a local meeting where people talked about the demand for it, that's great, right? Like, I mean, that shows something, that it's more than just like, Jim and Susie's idea that they're like, I don't know, let's write a grant and see what happens, right? So I think it shows some type of buy-in. So the quality of site and project, that's where I was talking about getting back kind of to the tenets of REAP. So thinking about what, what type of benefits are out there to both the environment as well as the citizenry. Things to really include here are talking about your, if there is like a dearth of parks, if there's not a lot of parks in the area for folks and you're serving a need, that's huge. That's kind of public benefit serves too. If you can get somebody out there to see what's on the site in terms of plant life, so if you have something out there, that's great. If you could even just list some trees that are out there, it just really shows that you are kind of taking into account the natural benefits. This isn't DOT. Like, I don't really want to care about, if it's 4 inches or 6 inches of concrete or asphalt or whatever. That's not really what we're looking for. We're like, cool, a trail, but then what else are the natural aspects of it? Clearly the direct recreation benefits, the public benefits served, local support, lots of different ways you can show that. Environmental benefits, so some of these always kind of seem redundant, but environmental benefits really come into play if you're doing some type of infrastructure improvement. So if you're doing like a shelter and a bathroom, talk about the low flow toilets, the solar tube, or the sunlight that you're bringing in rather than using, just always you have to turn on a light, right? Talk about your low flow sinks or your LED lighting, that the roof for the facility goes into a rain garden that you've planted with natives. Some of these things are fairly cheap, and many of you do them kind of routinely, and so get credit for them here. So that's really what that environmental benefits are. What are those green features? Permeable pavement, just even site considerations of how the water moves and how you're going to slow it down before it goes into the storm drain. So lots of different things. And then, sometimes they call it the golden goose, the quality of a public communications plan. Like, so many people overlook this and they're just like, well, I'll do a ribbon cutting and put something in the paper and a press release and on the website or whatever. And it's like 3 sentences long and you're going to get 4 points. There's been lots of different ways that people have just started to kind of knock the socks off of the reviewers and get more points. And when we look at the score breakdown, it's often just 2 or 3 points that will separate your grant from getting funded. The spread is never that huge in REAP. And so sometimes, you maybe can't correct for the fact that you don't have any water bodies in your area or whatever, but go ahead and, make sure that you're going to help really have, a long-term plan in getting people out to the site, and how you're going to keep reminding them of it. Are you going to have events out there that you already know? Talk about that, talk to your park and rec partners and say like, oh, are you guys going to have, programs out there? Or is the county's going to have programs out there? Put all that in there, because that's part of kind of the ongoing, is we want to say, one, here's a great entity out there. And we know Iowans, we're in this weird COVID time where everybody found our parks, but before, the number one thing was people were like, well, I don't even know where to go or what to do when I get there. So if you can help answer that question with that community public communications plan, you're going to do great. The just projects, just to show a little bit of kind of that competition like I was mentioning, the County Conservation Grant Program, last year we got 18 grants in, 4 were scored, amount requested was 5.7, that available was 961. So again, huge demand. And the county conservation guys, they only put in the best of the best. Like, most people don't write a grant just to like practice writing grants. So these are really, really amazing projects. So it's always really, the reviewers have a very rough time trying to fund or try to figure out which ones to fund. In the city parks, you can see those different categories. The large cities is the least competitive just because there's fewer of those. But you can see the numbers that applied and those that were awarded. And so this was at 12 million last year. So we should see roughly the same amount available. So for cities will be 1.9, almost 2 million. We did have a city that had de-approved some money, and we'll have a little bit of that this year. So it might be a little bit less than this, but around that ballpark. And you can see there that that miles of trail were 5.7, acres acquired 34 point, almost 35. And then dollars leveraged. So there was a decent amount of local match last year. So that's in there. So I already talked a lot about the application tips, but here's just more. And I mean, you guys write grants all the time, so I don't want to sound like you don't know what you're doing. This is just kind of the advice I give everyone. So take it or leave it. But with REAP, clearly we just want to focus on the natural resources and protection and enhancement. It's not just trail surface and width. So I don't need 10 pages about, the crushed gravel under, and then, like just, I mean, we need to know that you know what you're doing, but for the most part, where you need to spend your time with this grant application is talking about the protecting and improving the resource. Because we don't have a locked down application, include maps and pictures wherever you see fit. So I also review the state rec trails. I used to do fed rec trails and water trails. And so I've reviewed a lot of grants in my time. And when I review a grant, I read the first page and then I skip to a map, like an overview map where I can see like, okay, where in the world is this happening? Where's this happening in location in the community, to other parks, to what's happening, the phase of the trail. And then I go look at the budget and the timeline. And I say, okay, how much is this going to cost? And, when do you think you can get it done? So think about kind of those things. So think about when you write a grant or you review somebody else's grant, what are those key pieces of information that you want right up top? I want to know essentially what REAP is buying, what does this project do? When's it going to get done? Where is it? And how much? So to that end, maps are like the greatest thing. And I talk to the reviewers all the time. I mean, they would love to see us get to just like a 7 or 8 page application that was highly visual. So, I mean, for those of you who love words, I'm sorry, but for those of you who hate writing all the words, as much as you can put into maps and pictures, before pictures, if you have renderings of afters, that's great. We don't have a limit on any of that, and you can go ahead and just stick that in with your narrative, so if your first page project description is half pictures, half words, that's totally fine. And if every page honestly is that, that's great. If you have pictures of rare and unique species of plants out there, if you have pictures of, I mean, you guys have got a lot of rivers over there, so if any of these include water, people fishing, or any ability to talk about the aquatic life that's out there or things like that. You can always get data from the department on the number of people who have fishing licenses in any, given area, or things like that, to just help trying to drive home. The other thing that's really been coming up is just show that you have the funds available to complete the project. Even if some are other grant programs, show kind of what the plan B is if those don't pan out. There's oftentimes that we have conversations in these selection committees where folks are saying, okay, well, what if they don't get the state rec trail grant? Like, is this gonna, we have demand to spend this money today by all of these other people. So if we don't think it looks like you have the ability to actually get this done in the next 2 years, or we're gonna be holding off on too many funding sources, describe plan Bs. The county's gonna come back, or there's these other options. Some people have done a good job with that, and the committee really appreciates that. Don't leave that to be an assumption that if you don't get that grant, that the cities or the county or somebody is going to backfill that. So just go ahead and describe the plan B, plan C. What's REAP buying? I always encourage people to just have one other person read that project description and then tell you back what the project is, because there's oftentimes we're not exactly sure what the project is. That's kind of an amalgamation of things. And if you've already been funded for one, they're not exactly sure what phase we're doing. So really talk like in those maps phasing, here's the whole project, but this is specifically what's going to happen this time. It's really, really helpful to just understand what this project will do. I talked about the communication plan a lot. Project phasing I just did. We love the project phases. We're fine if cities want to come back year 1 for phase 1, year 2 for phase 2. Many cities have gotten multiple levels of phases, especially for those smaller communities who can only get so much money. It has to be the next phase. It can't be, for that other phase. So that's why it's careful to write that project's description. Sometimes it's too broad and they want to come back and they're like, well, we were only going to do, maybe the trailhead and half a mile. And then they're like, well, we want to come back and do the next mile. But I'm like, you wrote the grant for the trailhead and 2 miles. So that was all in your first grant. So just make sure that's why you're really specific. It can help you get additional dollars that way. This is going to be an increasing thing that everybody's been talking about, is just this plan for upkeep and maintenance. I don't really know what to do here. We don't have any criteria that sets against it or anything kind of like federal rec trails have. But, usually there's just a letter, from your managing entity that says, yep, we're going to do something. The more that you can discuss this, I mean, I've heard some decent grumbling from the selection committee about like, okay, but we have all these things in disrepair, like actually ever going to do anything. And it is difficult because there's not budget set aside. If there's budget set aside for anything, or if you have more of a plan on, they've got a mower and a sweeper, and so they're going to sweep it every Thursday or whatever, just if you can include some more information in there. No promises it's going to hurt or help. Like I'm just kind of letting you know the conversations that have happened. And then local match, kind of back to the budget thing. Where is it coming from? Is it secured, anticipated? One of the things that I laugh at sometimes is like when I review the state rec trails, I'll see that they'll say like REAP in, secured. And I was like, we haven't even had a cycle yet. Like, so I was like, that's not really. So just make sure that like, that you've updated your applications for this year, especially on that funding stuff. Because, and we tend to check with each other, some of the grant program managers, we tend to check with each other and be like, oh, okay, do they have this money or not? And so I'm like, well, no, they haven't even applied for it yet. So they won't know till October. So just make sure that stuff is all kind of locked up. So that way you just don't, lose anything there. On the website, there are, this is a really old slide, sorry. It looks pretty much like this, just with updates of the years. There's project summaries out there. If you see a grant that looks like somebody got a grant that looks like something that maybe your city wants to do, let me know and I can ship you that application. So you can look at and see what they did. I have all those on a Google Drive. I don't just share them to the world because sometimes people put like, if it's an acquisition, sometimes you'll see like personal information in there. So you just have to give it a quick look. But I'm happy to share those with you. So that way you can see what worked well for some other folks. There's an interactive map on there that shows which grants have gotten funded in your area, if you want to just look. And then there's just lots of resources with the application underneath and everything. So I'm just about to wrap up here, but I mean, we're all in this biz. We know that there are some not only great intrinsic benefits of having parks and open spaces, but they're also really great for the economy. The Outdoor Industry Association, when they kind of started in 2017, and this is all the retailers and equipment people who sell camping gear and fishing gear and everything. So they got together and they did state by state data. And this is the last time that I've seen this really compiled this way. And I keep talking to them about trying to do updated data, but and it'd be really interesting to see now, especially like, post-COVID, 65% of residents participate in outdoor recreation. And I think all of our Google Analytics and anecdotal data of just seeing people outside, that we think that number probably is bigger. 649 million in state and local taxes, 83,000 direct jobs. This is again, just the state of Iowa, and 8.7 billion in consumer spending annually. And again, who knows, if you tried to buy a bike or a kayak anywhere lately, maybe that spending has gone up a little bit. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions about anything. This is, you don't have to scroll in. This is just kind of a general impact to show that, every single county has benefited from REAP dollars, but we know that there's still plenty of work to be done. So I'm happy to talk about any projects, and just, it's kind of your turn. Thanks.
I do see there was one question in the chat box. If you can click on that.
Yep, I see that.
Okay.
Good question. We don't have any income limitations, so that's not a criteria for this program at all. So no, I mean, I think anecdotally though, I think it would be good that you can spit that in the narrative to talk about, you know, that these are generally free opportunities for folks and why it's good. So, but there's not an income category at all.
Tammy, is it possible to get a copy of this presentation?
Yep, I will. I'll email it right after this, so that way, and then you can send it out.
Perfect. Thank you.
The,
And then
the
another
recording
question I
and
have. Go ahead.
the recording and the PowerPoint will be on our website.
Oh, okay.
Thanks. Another question I had is, yeah, and I know this was not a pretty unusual legislative session, even though it was important to get the REAP program renewed, even though it was only for a couple of years. But is the Department of Natural Resources or somebody talking to our elected officials about the significance of the REAP program and the impact that it's made over the last 30 years? Because I suspect that there are many of our legislators who really don't have a clue. Now, you know, I think we're fortunate in our area because we have some who have been very involved and are strong advocates, Andy McKean being one of those.
Yeah.
But how do we, you know, this program should be getting a lot more money than it is. And I get this is not the year to be making that request. I understand that. But as we look at the future, how do we convey that message and get that across?
I think it's a great question. You know, I mean, Invest in Iowa, right? That was, I mean, and you know, my other half of my job is being the legislative liaison for the DNR. So, you know, I worked on Invest in Iowa really hard, like many of you have, right up until the end. And in my pretty informal opinion, it was going to go. And so before all this happened, right? So it's just real painful. And part of that would have been REAP. And it would have funded REAP probably pretty much at an almost full level of 20 million. And then as well, given it a 30-year sunset. So the interesting thing about the 2-year is from, I've heard from a couple of sources that the idea for a 2-year increase was to keep it as kind of a hot potato. So it would, because many people want it. So when Invest in Iowa comes back up, hopefully next year, we'll be able to say, okay, that they didn't, that you know, we got to you know, roll that sunset back later because so many people wanted it. Now I was really encouraged to hear that because, like you say, Dave, I mean, we're trying to talk to people about this all the time. And I'm not exactly sure what they're hearing. The other thing is there's a group called the REAP Alliance, right, which is all the nonprofit organizations, and they've really been, you know, kind of focused on Invest in Iowa because it's the same group of people. But it might be time to reach out to those guys to just say, do we need to kind of double down on some of this stuff? You know, is it time? So those are just kind of my thoughts.
Well, here's another thought. Maybe we chat now that the legislators have gone home, chat with a couple of folks who we know are strong advocates and say, oh, tell us what we can do to get this message across to your peers. You know, what kinds of things should we be doing in the quote unquote off season, as well as when they're back in session? Because I'm not going to assume that they all do their homework without somebody being in their face, to be honest with you. So.
No, that's great, Dave. I appreciate that. And that's a great suggestion.
This map is really kind of interesting because I'm just taking a look at Jackson County and looking at our number compared to others. And I'd say we've done pretty well for ourselves.
And this is a little bit outdated. I don't think I updated this at the end of last year. So there's some, so it's one of the things I'm going to work on in this off session, especially when I'm at home. So So I'll have an updated map with this, but it does really show those counties that have really gone for it. That's one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to Clinton County, and then that you guys, you know, Dubuque has been pretty good. You have a pretty active county conservation board. You have the city of Dubuque, and, you know, some of the other cities around have been pretty aggressive. And then with the, you know, Parks to People initiative, there's just been, you know, lots of just innovation and discussion around, you know, these programs. So I think it really shows when you're all kind of thinking about it and working together, you can be successful. And I bet those updated numbers will show that as well. And then you look in some other counties where you can see there's just not much engagement, and kind of what they're missing out on. So.
Are you done talking, Dave?
Yes, I am. Yes.
So Tammy, restrooms at a baseball field, would that be competitive at all?
No, those probably wouldn't qualify unless the restroom is going to serve the majority of an open space area.
So if it's a park.
Yeah, like if it's a park. But if it's like really close to the ball field or includes a concession stand or anything like that, it probably won't, like it would maybe qualify, but it wouldn't score well, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
With a low flow toilet.
Right, I mean, even with the low flow toilet, motion lights, LEDs.
Okay.
Anything else, Marla?
Not right now.
Are you finished talking, Marla?
No, Dave, when you're concerned, no, I'm not.
I'm going to jump in. So can you talk a little bit about how you handle, in a lot of the small towns and communities that we work with, they have a lot of in-kind contributions. And they, do you consider those as far as like, you can't do any work before you're awarded the grant, I assume, if it's in the budget.
Right.
And then do you have any, what are the procurement rules? Is it just straight state procurement rules, and how does that work?
So we are unique in the fact that we allow you to do whatever locally works. So this isn't like DOT where you have to follow state procurement rules. We're fairly old school in that, is that, you know, if you have in-kind, if anything, I think that really demonstrates that local support. And so talking about that in the grant, you know, that all of that is put in. We have several, especially with the smaller communities, you know, Bill's got the dozer, we can get, you know, this church group to help put up, you know, part of the shelter, you know, this other group is going to stain it. And, you know, that stuff just shows huge buy-in locally. And we know that that park's going to be more successful, especially in those smaller communities, because we know how much it means to them that they've seen this kind of park that they've been mowing for a little while, and maybe, you know, but then, you know, they really just like kind of go all in and, you know, do some plantings and put up a gazebo and, you know, a little walking path. And so all of that is really great and welcome, and you don't really have to account for it, only anecdotally, because it's a zero match program. So you don't, so I mean, you could say that you're going to ask for $30,000 and for all of this stuff, and then you're going to have $30,000 of in-kind. We don't even really care. We're not going to make you conservation education. If you do there, if there's any in-kind that you want reimbursed for, you know, so if you want like for salaries or anything for developing curriculum, you're going to have to demonstrate that, obviously, but not for the other program. So because we're not really quantifying that match, so it's not like two cities, all things being equal, but one has 30% local, you know, input and one has 25. We don't quantify that. So really, we just want to see local buy-in and how it's going to get done. And then we would just want to know that people have the actual right skills to do such a thing, because we've had those things happen too. The one other little thing that just reminded me that I usually say is especially for the very small communities. This is a very counterintuitive thing, and they hate when I say this, but it's so true. So I often get calls or see applications that are for like $8 or $9 or $10,000 to do something very, very specific. And I know that they're not, like, they're just being humble and they're just asking for what they need, and what they need is very specific and, you know, generally fairly small because of just the population size. But it doesn't make for a very competitive grant because it is so specific. And so I'm like, you have the ability to ask for $50,000. So I know it seems crazy, but increase your scope. What would you love to do? What would you like, you know, I mean, does your parking lot need new gravel? Does it need some new fencing? Can you plant some more trees? Can you maybe think about updating even more sidewalks in the park to make it nice? So because all of that is, or can you add in, you know, maybe a little, you know, fishing structure or shoreline fishing by the pond that you're talking about. It will make it much more competitive than just like, you know, an updated pit toilet or a, you know, mini rehab of a shelter that was built in 1945. So just kind of get them to think about that. And I know, and it's hard for them to be like, but I don't need that. The problem is they're probably never going to get a $10,000 grant unless it's really unique and different. So that's just one of those things for this type, in such a competitive grant program. It really helps to kind of have a broader scope.
That brings up one more question then. So if we're working on a project that has a large scope, but some of them aren't really REAP favorable, like a splash pad or, you know, a play set or something like that. Do you want to hear the whole story and the big picture, or do you just, is it a stronger application if you really just focus on the things that are REAP applicable?
That's a really good question. I would say paint the whole picture, but make it known that you're not asking for funding for those things, but that is just the whole package of the service to the community. But really where your focus is, you know, so I mean, if there's like an overall, you know, schematic of what the park is going to look like, and it includes those things, then I would highlight the REAP areas, which are, you know, your natural plantings or your, you know, sidewalks or different things like that. Just highlight that so that the committee knows that, you know, that those aren't eligible. But I think that's fine, you know.
Okay.
So, darn it, I had another thought that left me too.
I'm going to keep going unless anyone else jumps in. Dave? Got anything, Dave?
I have nothing else, but
Okay.
I do appreciate your time this morning, Tammy. This is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
One other question. So if they want to, if there's a purchase of land, or say that there's another state grant application that's out there, can REAP be married to other state funds, and we keep applying, you know, for you can do a continuing ed or a conservation education grant and a city parks and open spaces all in one swoop?
Yeah, generally, so REAP can't match wildlife habitat stamp or fish habitat. Those are other department ones that generally pertain to county conservation boards. So those can't match. It can match like state rec. I've never had one, I don't think, that's matched like a conservation education. So that would be interesting. Oh, the other thing I remembered I was going to say is, if you have any history, like, we've been really excited seeing some projects that have some interpretation of local history into their parks. It's just been, you know, I can't remember, but there's been some that if you have anything, I think some of that, you know, REAP doesn't just have to be local or natural history interpretation. So if you're talking about a park and doing some interpretation, please include some historical stuff if you have something good. The one example that I can think of is City of Cherokee has this place called Magnetic Park. It's just kind of this farm pond in the middle of town that kind of floods, and it's a really low area. And in the turn of the century, somebody went there and said it was like healing mineral waters, and it turned into this whole big thing that was like nationally renowned. They built it was like a whole like hotel that was there. And then what happened is the brothers got in a fight, and one of them went and tested the water, and it's like, it's just regular water. And then basically it went defunct, and this all happened in a period of like a decade. And like none of the structures except for one barn stays. But they have this whole interpretation around this kind of interesting story about your town. So draw from those things. If you have any, Columbus Junction down south has that, that suspension bridge, and that has a little bit of a folklore around it that they've talked about. And so I think that's really great to incorporate that. And I think that helps set your grant apart as well. That goes for state rec trails too. I mean, we all got real excited about that Cherokee grant because it was just so different. You read a lot about the same things. So draw from some of that stuff to help make your context. It wasn't even a question. I'm so sorry. I got excited about the Cherokee thing.
We were just talking about pairing grants. And
oh yeah, sorry. Yes.
That, but yeah, I think you answered it. Okay.
The other grant source for splash pads, playgrounds, or different things like that is the Land and Water Conservation Fund. That's administered through the Department of Natural Resources. I don't do that one. I'm not sure when the deadline is for that one. Gosh, I need to memorize all these.
It's March.
Is it March? Yeah. And just a reminder, that's a federal grant. So it comes with all the federal rigmarole. So it's available. And that is constantly being worked on at Congress for reauthorization as well as additional. So if that ever happens to be increased, then that would be available for those things too. But right now there's some level, I think it's generally what, $300,000-$400,000 a year. So
Tammy, if by some small miracle I have a draft application by July 15th, do you ever review draft applications for people or no?
It's August 15th, so you got yourself another month, but it's I generally don't review draft applications, but I'm happy if we just even want to like schedule a phone call and we just kind of walk through it. That's fine. I don't review the grants. I actually don't score them. I review them all, but I don't score them. So that way I can just kind of help everybody, because I want that scoring team to have a horrible, horrible time trying to figure out which projects to choose. I want them all to be so good. I know they hate that. They're like, stop it. But, and I also just want to see a lot of competition. I just want to see a lot of demand for the program, because I know it's out there, and I just want to make sure that the process is such that it can get out there. But if you want to just give me a call and walk through stuff, I would happily tell you what I think is good to focus on or not good, or ways to help brainstorm narratives and things like that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. One other little thing that's weird about REAP is there are county committees for REAP, which is almost exclusively at this point, except for in a couple of your counties, like Blackhawk isn't in your county. That's too far over, isn't it? There's REAP county committees, and so they need to sign off on those grants. So not only do cities and counties need to sign off on them, there's a REAP committee, and I'll work pretty hard here in getting that updated online, so that way you can just email that person and figure out when either some committees still meet, but mostly you will just have an appointment to probably get an electronic signature at this point from somebody in the county. So back in the day,
have to be an original signature.
I think I accept a PDF. We're doing electronic signatures everywhere. I think it's completely fine. I'll double check with legal, but like I'm going to take that note and put that guidance though on the website, because you're right, would be good for everybody.
Because Mike Dauber in Cedar County was convinced it has to be an original signature.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, if you could check that out, that'd be great.
Yeah. We're even doing the in just Adobe now, you can just like click a button and it says like electronic signature generated or whatever. Mm-hmm. We're doing that now at the state level for letters and things. So, I think it's fine. it, you know,
Okay.
it's binding, but it's not like he, you know, I think it's fine.
Okay.
I know Dubuque County does still have a REAP committee meeting, and they usually meet probably the first week in August, like the week before
Mhm.
the applications are due. And so they do have people present their application, and then they approve it and
Good.
sign it.
Yeah. It was kind of, you know, REAP was started in 1989, which was like a little bit of the birth of the planning movement, right? So it was like, you know, how do we get, instead of just get these people to coordinate on things, and so that's where those county committees came from, is they knew that there were lots of people who wanted things, and so how to kind of coordinate some of these efforts at the county level. And at that time, you know, I mean, we were receiving 1,000 applications, so it was pretty crazy. And so it was like a way to narrow or winnow the field a little bit, so you would put your best in. But now, you know, there's clearly very, very many other planning efforts that happen in a county. So this REAP committee can sometimes be redundant depending on what the county has going on.
Right. Any last questions? That was really helpful to
Thank
me, and that's important. And I think everybody asked good questions. And I'm really excited that everything worked well.
Me too.
For our first remote attempt. And just as a quick blurb, Dan, you're going to do another session next Wednesday at 10. And what are you going to talk about?
I think we're just going to talk about trails. So trail planning and grant applications and funding and everything trails. So I'm sure we'll talk about REAP a little bit in that, but we'll also go beyond that and talk about other funding sources. You know, how to put together, or what program you should look at applying for your specific project and things like that.
Right. So Tammy, if you'll email me the PowerPoint, and if it's okay with you, I'll just put it with the recording on our website for a while for anybody who needs it. And thank you so much. I'm sure we'll all be in touch on or before August 15th.
Please do. That'd be great.
Thanks so much. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Let's see if I can end here. I'm always